Hello, I'm Amy Stevenson, and this is The Human CEO. In each episode, we'll be meeting with CEOs and senior leaders to understand their approach to leadership, the challenges they faced, and how they overcame them. We'll also be asking what they feel it takes to be a great leader.
In order to be a really effective leader in a senior position, you're basically always going to be getting things wrong. And so this idea of perfection is driven by ego, I think. As a CEO, you've got a board, you've got investors, you've got the stock market, you've got everything else. If you don't put your ego in a box, they'll put your ego in a box for you.
Welcome to The Human CEO. I'm your host, Amy Stevenson, and today I'm joined by Kyte. Kyte's the chief exec of Checkit, an intelligent operations platform that gives operational leaders up-to-the-minute information and control over the deskless workforce. Kyte joined Checkit in February 2021 as chief commercial officer and has overseen the transformation of the sales and marketing to drive significant growth in prospective revenue. His extensive leadership experience includes numerous combat roles as an army officer in the Royal Gurkha Rifles, as well as a consistent track record of leadership success in the private sector. Kyte joins us today to share his insight as a leader and a human CEO. Thank you for joining us today, Kyte. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you.
Yeah, and thanks very much, Amy, and thanks for bringing me on. Really pleased to be here.
No worries. I'm looking forward to hearing your story. So can you tell us a little bit about Checkit and the organisation that you lead, what it stands for and what you're working towards, please?
So Checkit's a software company. Actually, it's a software and IoT organisation. We focus firmly on what's called the deskless workforce. I'm just going to take it to the highest level, just so people can understand what that really means.
Okay.
When you look at the entire global workforce, everyone who does a job globally, deskless workforce represents about 80% of all workers in the world.
Wow. So
that's about 2.7 billion people. And most of us, or a lot of us probably listening to this podcast, will know about the knowledge workers, people like you and I who sit behind laptops all day and interact with platforms. It's about 600 million people in the workforce. Whereas Checkit is firmly focused on solving and addressing the digital challenge, the digital and the automation challenge for the deskless workforce, which has traditionally been very underserved by both technology and from an investment perspective. That's been changing over the last 4 or 5 years. And then what we've seen in the pandemic is we've seen a massive acceleration of the need to go digital for the deskless worker. So who is the deskless worker? Well, we might call them key workers. So people who are working in the NHS and healthcare clients are a significant source of revenue for us, a big client base. But they could also be people who work in restaurants, people who work in food retail, Sainsbury's. So people who are on their feet doing work, and that work can be low complexity. So I need to follow a set of processes and procedures, or it can be high complexity. As in, I'm a nurse or I'm a ward manager and I've got to be able to interact with patients and get the right drug allocations. But I don't know how it is that I'm supposed to be doing my work necessarily unless I follow traditionally just a bunch of paper checklists. So problem with the deskless workforce in these industries, and most large organizations are predominantly filled with deskless workers, certainly in the kind of industries I just referred to you. The problem they've got is that most deskless workers, 73% of them, are still using paper-based checklists in order to do their work, do their tasks. Okay? Checkit is here to solve that problem because if you're still using paper-based checklists and it's 2022, there's a problem.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we're digitizing that. So our platform enables a deskless worker, so it could be a nurse in this case, to conduct all of their work on effectively our app, which is a cloud-based platform. The app allows them to conduct all their task checks. They can evidence things through photo capture, barcode scanning, RFID tagging. It all gets gathered into one place. Yeah, so it could be a nurse, it could be someone working in a retail outlet, and it could be across hundreds of different retail outlets. All people are using the same platform. All that data is gathered into one place. When it's gathered into one place, it allows leaders to make real-time decisions on how the business is running and how better to work with your people. And the other part of what we do is all of the deskless workers, they're operating in a physical world, in a physical space. So they're interacting with buildings and assets. So again, think of the nurse. Typically in the past, nurses are having to do lots of manual checks on high-end clinical fridges and freezers, for example, vaccine storage, blood storage, etc. And that's taking them away from patients. But more than that, if you're only doing a check once an hour, it's very administrative and very burdensome. But of course, if something has gone out of range within that hour, if you're in the NHS, you basically have to get rid of the entire stock. And so that's costing the NHS £300 million a year. And so our IoT sensors, so Internet of Things sensors, are automatically monitoring all these different assets so that the humans and the people in the process no longer have to do those kinds of checks. Again, we link it back into the platform and you get one kind of end-to-end solution. So that's really what Checkit is. That's what we stand for. We're bringing digital to the deskless workforce, and it's a very exciting market.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And when you put it like that, it doesn't make sense why it doesn't exist already. So it's fantastic that you're bringing it to market now, because it's going to make a massive impact, isn't it, on those organisations that have their deskless workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so as a leader of that organisation, what kind of challenges are you up against at the moment?
It's a good question. We have, specific to Checkit, we're a listed company, so we're on the AIM market. And we are what I would describe as a kind of a scale-up organization. So we have a massive opportunity in front of us, and we have a challenge to grow and seize that opportunity, right? The market that's in front of us is fragmented. There's no big players in it. There are a few competing organizations. There's slightly more in the US than there is in UK, Europe. Mm-hmm. So our job is to lead that market. Okay, and so we've kind of got the very fortunate position of being in the market right as the market's starting to define itself. And so every week, every month, we're seeing further and further consolidation and evidence that this market's going somewhere. So our challenge is, how do you grow at the sufficient scale to get a sizable footprint, so that when the big players, the Microsofts and the Googles of this world, they will enter at some point. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to be self-sufficient by the time that happens, so we can defend our corner and take a leading market position. So it is a big challenge, and within that, you then have all of the internal challenges of trying to align the organization and the teams and our leaders around achieving that big goal. So it's certainly a continual work in progress.
Yes, absolutely. And so my next question, Kit, is usually tell me about your journey into leadership. But I see your time at Sandhurst, and I see your time in the was it the Gurkha Rifles you were in?
Yeah, Gurkha, yeah, that's right, the Royal Gurkha Rifles. Yeah.
And so, wow, in terms of leadership, was it always going to be the case that you would maybe transition from the military and go into a leadership role, or how did that evolve? Was it quite an organic process, or was that by design?
Yeah, it's a solid question. Look, I mean, I think luck and timing always plays a far bigger role than most people want to recognise. Mm-hmm. But it's only now that I'm in the position I'm in that I can reflect upon the kind of accelerated leadership journey I went on when I was in the army. Mm-hmm. Because, not only did I go through Sandhurst, and I was very fortunate to be selected into one of the elite units, the Gurkhas, mm-hmm. and then even more fortunate in many respects to lead them on combat operations in Afghanistan multiple times. Mm-hmm. In my sort of mid to late 20s, I was a sort of combat hardened veteran, as it were, and that's where I think I learned some pretty big fundamental truths about what effective leadership looks like, albeit under very highly stressed, highly pressurized circumstances. So I took all that experience, and I knew that there was a point in time where I was going to want to transition out of the military, and I wanted to see what I could achieve in business. Mm-hmm. And it's only been about, I suppose it's been about 10 years really, and not even 10 years actually, about 9 years since I left the military, and the journey's continued to accelerate. So it's really only in the last few years that my approach was typically to say, I don't know anything about business. I need to learn the fundamentals. I'll park my so-called leadership experience in my back pocket for the first few years until I've proven myself and I've understood my environment. And then as I've got to a certain level of seniority, I've been able to then reapply some of those tools, and it's now a really effective combination. So it certainly wasn't a given that this was going to work out the way it has. Uh-huh. I think, if I was to be honest, the thing that I'm probably most, I guess, proud of for myself is that I've been able to translate leadership success in one domain mm-hmm. and replicate leadership success in another domain. Yes. So military and business, then they're definitely not the same environment. They're quite different. There are some similarities, but it's been great to be able to realize that it's multifaceted, the way that you can bring leadership to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was going to be one of my questions as well. And please forgive my civilian ignorance, but I would imagine that leadership within the Royal Gurkha Rifles, you know, you're sort of following somebody over the hill because that's your job to follow them over the hill. Whereas in business, there's more of a sort of a hearts and minds piece. Is that fair to say from the difference in the leadership perspective, or not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hopefully burst a few of those illusions actually, because
good
people have. I mean, some people might have this working assumption that what you need to do is issue orders, you know, and your highly trained and well-trained soldiers will follow them no matter what. I mean, the reality is, as a leader in the military, you're actually constantly having to sell a plan to your men. Okay. If you can't sell that plan to your men or women, but in my case it was men because the Gurkhas. If you can't sell that plan effectively, they will not follow you into battle, because it's life and death, and people aren't that stupid, and they're certainly, and so in a way, what you get is a lot of what I would call the table stakes work, because they're such elite soldiers. The table stake work gets taken care of. I don't have to worry about, you know, the minutiae of what they do, but you do have to worry about the really big strategic reason as to what we're going to do. You're planning the missions that you're going on, and those missions could, if delivered wrong, could end in, you know, injury or harm or death to your own people. So you carry that responsibility. So if they're going to be a success, though, you have to be able to sell it. So it's not a given. So I think for me, the leadership thing in the military is it's brought into focus right at the sharp end of where you do your work. And a lot of stuff back in barracks that might happen just automatically. It's, you know, you're almost more of a manager than leader, but without question it gets brought up. Now, whereas what I've seen that's different in business, there's a number of different businesses. First of all, you've got two completely different ideologies at play, right? So in the military, you're going along a sort of geopolitical ideology. You're actually buying into a far bigger idea. We're here to make a difference. We're here to do something, save a civilian force, help remove a dictator, whatever it's going to be. It's a far bigger goal. In business, ultimately, you know, it's driven by profit and loss. So what we're buying into is the success of our organization, but our organization can only be successful if it's delivering the right business outcomes. So the lens by which you motivate people in business is necessarily different. You actually have to appeal a lot more to people's personal and intrinsic motivations. And everyone's an individual in business. Typically, you've got, you know, someone's in marketing, someone's in sales, someone's in product, etc. And I've got a whole different set of things that motivate me as a person. Some people are more money motivated, i.e. salespeople, and some people are slightly less money motivated, but they're much more motivated about the quality of their work, product and R&D, for example. So the difference, I think, in business is you've got to find a way to make that overarching goal, the success of your organization, translate into a whole different set of functional areas and work on the individual basis to get them to cooperate with you. So it is a slightly more ambiguous challenge, is what I'd say.
Yeah. No, thank you for clarifying that. And as I say, please forgive my civilian ignorance, but that makes perfect sense when you put it in that sense. It's good to have burst those bubbles. And so in terms of leadership then, are there characteristics that you feel that all great leaders should have? You know, how would you define a great leader? Yeah,
I think there's a lens by which you can judge all leaders. And I think it goes like this. I think you are either effective or you're ineffective. And it doesn't matter what the domain is you're in. So you could be in business, you could be in the military, you could be in politics. If you're effective in what you're supposed to be doing and the outcomes you're supposed to be going towards, then somewhere within that, you must be a good leader, because you cannot sustainably be effective if you're not.
Yeah.
Right? And the vice versa is true. If you're ineffective in the outcomes and the results you're trying to move your organization, your people towards, then it doesn't matter how great you may seem, you're failing as a leader.
Okay.
Right. So you're either effective or you're ineffective. There's two types of lead. That's it. And I think you can apply that across organizations, across domains, across, you know, industries. And I think, you know, and I think within that, I don't think it's a given that people all rise to the limits of their potential. Yeah.
Agree.
I think it's quite the opposite. So I think what I quite often say to our people at Checkit or our leaders at Checkit, I say, look, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we can all say this is what we expect and this is the lofty standard we're all going to go execute towards. But if you tolerate subpar performance, if you tolerate subpar execution, that is what your team will rise to or fall to. Okay, so you need to raise your own standards and what you tolerate to the highest possible level in order to get people to move towards their potential. And I think you can apply that across the board.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's great advice. A good soundbite too to remember. And is there a piece of advice or an experience that's really shaped your approach to leadership? I mean, was it early on in your career or later on? But what has shaped your leadership style?
I'd say there's probably no one single piece of advice, but there is, in fact, a lot of what I've learned, my leadership style has been built around has been from following the actions and the behaviors of those that I respect.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think, and within that, you then kind of learn the advice. And yeah, so for me, it's what I've been taught over time, and it's been either by, very respected military leaders and indeed business leaders, mm-hmm. is that you can't control the uncontrollables.
Yeah.
And a lot of people want to. And a lot of people fall into the trap of trying to make elaborate plans that cover all bases. And then it gives them a sense of comfort. They temporarily suspend their anxiety. Yeah. You can't do that. What you actually have to do is get very comfortable with the fact that you have your little circle of influence and control, mm-hmm. for which you might be able to control some things. And then most other things which are outside of that are way out of control. And so instead of trying to put a rigid framework around it, just be very flexible, very fluid, and very agile and adaptable. Mm-hmm. And so that's the main thing I've taken away from people over the years. And then within that, choose action over inaction. Okay, yes. So the tendency to want to think too much about what you think the solution is based upon a bunch of uncontrollables that you don't really understand, mm-hmm. promotes this kind of paralysis. Yeah, and I've rarely come across, at least in my various lines of work, I've rarely come across a situation where that's going to be an acceptable outcome, because the time and the clock is always against you. So choose action over inaction. The action itself may actually be wrong, but you're moving towards something, and then you can adjust, and then you can adjust, and then you can adjust. Yeah. And eventually you get back to where you need to be.
Yeah, especially over the last couple of years, I think there's been a lot of energy wasted in trying to plan for what's coming over the horizon, because we just don't know, do we? And we're in the VUCA environment. Anything could happen. We thought we were coming out of the pandemic, and then the situation in Ukraine is all over the media, and it's very difficult to plan for everything. So I completely agree with you there. Just do the next best thing, the next right thing is the way forward, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, 100%.
And if someone was looking to follow in your footsteps then, so either they were right at the start of their career and they were looking to end up in the chief exec chair, or if they were hoping one day to take a step up into a leadership role, what kind of advice would you offer them?
Okay, well, I think if I was to try and give some cogent advice or some concise advice, I would say, look, the first and foremost, you've got to check your ego. I'm saying that kind of quote unquote. Mm-hmm. I think the more senior you get in leadership positions, there can be a danger and a tendency for your ego to get out of control. You suddenly think you're the master of the universe. You don't need to follow up your words with actions that are appropriate to them. And indeed, you suddenly become unwilling to listen to either advice or criticism from others, both up and down the organization and outside the organization. So I think check your ego, get your ego, put it in a box, because in order to be a really effective leader in a senior position, you're basically always going to be getting things wrong. And so this idea of perfection is driven by ego. I think, you have a lot of pressures above you. So as a CEO, you've got a board, you've got investors, you've got the stock market, you've got everything else. I mean, if you don't put your ego in a box, they will put your ego in a box for you. Yeah. But you won't be thinking clearly, because you'll be constantly, moving from one emotional state to another rather than actually doing your job and just leading and executing. So I think that one, and I think within that means you need to, by definition, therefore, you need to practice humility at all times. So you don't have all the answers. Someone who could be three layers down in the organization could be trying to do something that's truly valuable, and you should pay attention to that. Mm-hmm. Someone once mentioned to me the idea of reverse mentors. I quite like the idea of reverse mentors. You could probably learn a lot off teenagers right now because of the way they're trying to interact with the world. Yeah. Yes, So yeah, I think that's what I would advise, and I suppose the final one would be, and it's related to the point I said earlier, which is, for me, just live in a constant state of adaptation. So, I think Charles Darwin said, it's not the most intelligent of the species that survives; it's the one that's just most adaptable to its environment. Yeah. And I really think that's true. And as we said, in this VUCA world, and in a world that gives never-ending big macroeconomic shocks to you, just be really adaptable, and that's how you're going to survive and thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very much more so now than ever. I think the role of the leader is to keep taking action, as you said, but always plan to course correct, to keep moving forward, but be open to the course corrections. As long as you've got that long-term vision and you know where you're going, there is absolutely no harm in sort of course correcting, as long as you're going in the right direction and you get yourself back on track, because you have to do that. If the pandemic taught us anything, it was that: keep the vision in sight, but keep moving forward in whichever way you can.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Because people still have an obsession with, again, going back to something we said earlier about having trying to control all the uncontrollables. People want to do it because they want to feel comfortable, fundamentally. I'm a big believer in discomfort. Discomfort is a source of growth. But also, I say to everyone in the organization, I don't want to see anything more than a 1-year plan. And frankly, within that 1-year plan, I'm expecting it to pivot once or twice within that year. Because beyond that, really, what's the purpose of a plan beyond a year at the moment? In almost any environment right now, we're barely getting through a quarter without there being some significant change to assumptions, operating model, conditions, runaway inflation, cost of living, etc. If you rigidly stick to that plan just because you don't want to have to think of another one, then you're being ineffective as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in terms of leadership then, we're up against lots of challenges at the moment. It feels like you say, everything changes on a quarterly basis. But are there leaders that you've either come across in your career or that you are aware of through, reading autobiographies or just being aware of them as public figures? Is there a leader, past or present, that really stands out to you that you particularly admire? And if so, what is it about their approach that makes them stand out for you?
There is, sort of, when I reflect on this, there's many, and there's actually many historical figures who are no longer with us who you could look at and just think, wow, there's so much to be gained from them, be they Nelson Mandela or Winston Churchill, etc. I think for me, there's someone in particular, and it's related to my background, so therefore you can kind of see how I get there. There's a person in the US called Jocko Willink. Okay. And he's quite on trend now, but I sort of became aware of him maybe 6-7 years ago. Jocko Willink's an ex-Navy SEAL and now very successful entrepreneur, effectively. Actually runs, as part of his entrepreneurship portfolio, he runs his own leadership consultancy that's also become very successful. Okay. But outside of that, he's got his own podcast that is, sort of top 10 podcast in the US, all on leadership, strategy, tactics, etc. And bringing real life examples of it, that's become a runaway success. And frankly, what he's actually done is he's built a very successful brand around himself. So he's TEDx talking, he's going all over the world doing various things. Why I admire Jocko is not only because, from a personal perspective, he's a great example of someone who's harnessed some brilliant experience from the military, the US military in this case, Navy SEALs, and then converted it into outsized performance in the business world. But I think he's transcended that. He's gone beyond just business into something of a thought leader, right, and a very successful one of that. And what I've been able to identify is that he's actually become very savvy. He's absolutely exploiting social media to promote his brand and his platform. But what he's done is he's executed just rigorously and ruthlessly throughout this time. He's just always on message. His message doesn't deviate. He builds a following. He executes time and time again. And I think that laser focus, that clarity of vision and that clarity of execution is really, really hard to maintain over time. And so for him to have been at this thing now for probably the better part of a decade and just growing exponentially with success is testament to his ability to do so.
Yeah.
Now, of course, he does some outrageous stuff, like he gets up at 4:30 every day and he only needs 4.5 hours of sleep and all that kind of superhero stuff. I mean, I don't care so much about that, but for me, it's how he's executing on that plan, that vision, and the message which he puts down has been, I think, been quite inspirational. Not just people in the US, but he's got a huge following internationally. I think it's great to see that live and in action.
Yes, yeah. And what was his name? Jocko Willink.
Jocko Willink.
Jocko Willink. We'll take a look. I've not come across him before. That does sound like definitely worth a listen. And so beyond that podcast then, are there books or other content that you're consuming that helps shape your leadership style or supports you as a leader at the moment? Have you got any recommendations beyond Jocko Willink?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got, a couple of things I'm reading. Well, from a non-fiction perspective, let's just say, I'm reading. It's related to my industry, but it's related to business. It's related to our world. There's a book called Scary Smart, which is the future of artificial intelligence by someone called Mo Gaudat, who is a very senior Google X, PhD computer science guy, now left, and big thought leader in the space of what artificial intelligence will mean for our world. And I think for me, it's very important. I've read a number of books on this stuff by people like Max Tegmark and Nick Bostrom. The way the artificial intelligence is already impacting our lives and will impact every facet of our lives in the very near future is, it's going to be the single biggest transformation in the history of humanity. So I'm reading up on it because it both fascinates me, slightly scares me, and it makes me ask the question, so what do I do? What do my people, what do my organization do to try and survive and thrive in that kind of a world? So that's one book that I'm reading. I think can highly recommend most people get on board with this stuff. And then another book which I read not too long ago, which was a really, really interesting book, is a book called The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. And it's partly based on leadership, and it's also partly based on what it is to gain and maintain power in many different formats, and how you actually successfully utilize that in your living, working environment. And so, that's another book that I think and it's basically just a book that's split across, each law is a chapter. Each chapter has anecdotal historical reference to examples where it's been used correctly and examples where it's been used incorrectly, and so it really brings the entire thing to life. And I think you can take a lot from that. It really doesn't matter who you are, what level of leadership you're in or not in. I think these things are very, very useful for living a more effective life.
Yeah, that one sounds like a really great read. I'm just getting to the end of an MBA, so I'm not really, if it wasn't on the reading list, it didn't get a look in for the last couple of years, but I'll be taking a look at that one. That sounds good. Brilliant. Thank you for that. And so can you tell us a bit about what's going to be going on at Checkit over the next 6 to 12 months? What's happening this year that you're excited to share with us?
Yeah, well, Checkit's in a great place at the moment. We, so as I mentioned, we're a listed company on the AIM market. We had a very successful capital raise at the end of last year. So we raised a bunch of money. The investors, we were actually oversubscribed, so that meant I was able to turn down some commitments and some cash we just didn't need it all. But what it meant was that the institutional investor community has really bought into the Checkit story, the Checkit narrative, where we're very well capitalized. And so as I look towards the remainder of this year, albeit our financial year only started at the 1st of February, so we're only 6-7 weeks into it. So as I look forward to this year, we have to execute on the plan. Okay, that plan is growth. So we're a software company. We have some pretty aggressive growth targets. Some of those targets are in the market. They're publicly available information, but our annual recurring revenue numbers need to hit new heights. That means we need to grow, we need to sell, we need to deliver our services at increased scale, both in the UK and Europe and also in the US. We established our US footprint about a year ago. So that's been quite successfully set up. And we have a number of clients on board already. So we will continue to scale up. So the theme is growth without question. I'd caveat that now and say the theme is sustainable growth.
Yes. Yeah.
In that it's not growth at all costs. It never should be. And I think definitely in this current talking about how you slightly adjust your plans as you go along. I look at the current macroeconomic environment between the end of the pandemic, war in Ukraine, rising cost of living, global supply chain challenges, all these kind of things. And you think, okay, look, we're going to do growth. We're going to do it in a sustainable way, which means we'll manage our position. And we'll also look to keep the business quite trim and quite lean in how we're operating. So, but it's super exciting. We've got a brilliant product, a brilliant platform, and taking that to market and helping customers in industries. For example, if we look at the hospitality industry at the moment, they've had a rough time over the last couple of years in the pandemic. Now they're trying to get back to full speed, but they've got a real problem because a lot of the staff that they used to employ, a lot of that staff moved into different industries. So they're now trying to do the same amount of work with less people, and they haven't got a solution with how to deal with it. So I look at that and see that's a classic area where something like Checkit can really help, because we don't use our platform and you can actually do more with less, for example. And hospitality industry is huge, and not just the UK, Europe, US. It's a massive source of revenue. It's key to getting this economy back ticking where it needs to be. So I see a lot of areas where we can help people.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So watch this space effectively.
Indeed.
Brilliant. Well, I wish you the best of luck with it, and thank you for taking the time to speak. I've really enjoyed listening to your story and hearing more about your leadership approach. So thank you, Kit. It's been great speaking with you.
Yeah, absolute pleasure, Amy. Thanks a lot. And I wish you the best of luck with your endeavours as well.